Hi everybody, welcome back to the channel. My name is lukemick, and in this video, I'm going to be ranking the Friday the 13th film series in its entirety. So if you're familiar with me or my channel, you may know that I'm a big fan of horror films. It's kind of my comfort go-to genre. Good or bad, I'll always enjoy a horror film, no matter what really. So it may surprise you to learn that I had actually never seen a very good majority of the Friday the 13th films until just a couple of weeks ago. Up until making this video, the only Friday films I had seen were the original one, Jason X on more than one occasion, Freddy vs. Jason on more than one occasion, and then bits and pieces, hacks and slashes of the Friday the 13th 2009 remake. So just to give you a bit of context, I didn't go into this video a fan of Friday the 13th, and I still wouldn't really consider myself a fan of Friday the 13th. I like some of these films, but a lot of them I feel are missed opportunities and could have been done a lot better, so just know that going in, I'm not a die-hard Friday the 13th fan. I don't feel as strongly about Jason Voorhees as a character as some people might, so please just take that into consideration while you're watching this video. And also, I do have just a little list of things here that I had in mind while critiquing and ranking these films. There are 4 things I would like to mention. 1. The film has to have likable characters. You might not think this sounds very important, but honestly, you spend a lot more time in these films watching teenagers banter than you do watching them get killed by Jason. So I actually think it's really important to have characters that aren't super annoying and just boring as hell to watch. 2, this one's pretty obvious. It has to have good kills and good makeup and gore effects. That's kind of why people watch these movies. They want to see people killed in horrible, grotesque, awful ways. 3 is for creativity. You know, there are 12 films in this series, and as long as they keep it fresh and change it up a little bit each time, I'm happy with that, even though some of the changes can be pretty drastic and ridiculous. As long as they try something new and don't keep showing me the same thing over and over again, I'll be happy. And 4, this is the most important thing, is it entertaining? You know, whether it be entertaining in a way where it's actually a very well-made horror film, or is it so bad it's good? That's really the most important point on this list here, is the movie has to entertain me, because if I'm being honest with you right now, there are a number of the films in this series that did not entertain me very well, and because of that, their ranking will be lower than a movie that maybe is so bad it's good. So just keep that in mind, and let's get started with the 12th film on my list. Okay, so coming in at the bottom of my list is Friday the 13th Part 3. Let me tell you why. This movie is making me so angry just having to talk about it, because there isn't anything to say about this film. It is so unspecial, other than the fact that Jason gets his mask. Fine. That's a special moment in the series. I get it. But the rest of this movie is so damn boring. It is the dullest film in the series. We've already seen the same exact formula repeated in the first film, in the second film, and then they come back at us with it again in the third film. Plus, this is the longest out of the original 3. Plus, it's the most just obnoxious, annoying, forgettable group of teenagers of the first 3 films. I hate Friday the 13th Part 3, and I hate that I have to talk about it right now, because there's just nothing to say about it, because it's such a dull film. And that's all I can say about it. That's honestly it. Friday the 13th Part 3 is just a boring movie that I never want to have to watch again, because it's such a waste of damn time. So coming in at number 11 is probably a pretty controversial pick, and that is the original Friday the 13th. I initially watched this film 5 or 6 years ago, and I remember not being very impressed by it, and upon rewatching it, I can report that I once again was not impressed by this film in the slightest. One of the biggest issues with this film is that it's just filled with a bunch of flat, boring characters that aren't fun to watch. The only funny comic relief character in the film is, I think, the first to be killed off, and he's killed off screen, which the thing is, this original film acts more as a suspense film and not so much a horror film, and to me, the suspense just doesn't work. It's never frightening, it's never unsettling, everything is just incredibly boring. There's so much walking around in the woods at night, it's really hard to see everything, and it's just an ugly, boring movie to watch. There's no other word I can use to describe these movies other than boring, because that's how I felt watching them. I just wanted them to be over with. The beginning of the Friday the 13th series is so underwhelming and lame. The only thing I like about the first Friday the 13th film is when Mrs. Voorhees walks out of the shadow and introduces herself.
Well, I'm Mrs. Voorhees, an old friend of the Christies.
I just think that Betsy Palmer's line delivery in that moment of the film is just perfect, and it's a giant revelation for the film. It's a really big deal. But then we're treated to like 10 minutes of her chasing our final girl around the campgrounds. It's the most unconvincing final fight chase that I've ever seen. I just don't buy that this old woman is able to hunt down and be a threat against this 20-something-year-old who's probably pretty athletic and agile. It's just an unbelievable lame fight. It sucks. The decapitation of Mrs. Voorhees is pretty good. It's a well-done head decapitation. And then the final scene in this film is framed really well. I do like the final jump scare with Jason coming out of the water and pulling our final girl out of her canoe. It's a very iconic horror film moment, and it works. It's pretty well done, but none of that makes up for how boring it is to sit through this entire film. Coming in at number 10 is Friday the 13th Part 7, The New Blood. This is the psychic one, and admittedly, that's the aspect of this film that I do enjoy. I don't know how people feel about it, introducing a psychic character to fight off against Jason, but that's my favorite part of the film. I really like the idea of this main character, our final girl, having these psychic powers, feeling guilt for essentially killing her father, and also fighting off against this doctor who's trying to use her in these unethical ways for his own scientific pursuits. I thought that all that stuff was hammy, kind of dumb, but it was more engaging than the rest of this film. Friday the 13th Part 7 has, I think, the worst group of teenagers in the entire series. They're so annoying and obnoxious, and they eat up a ton of screen time. There are these two girls who are trying to win the heart of this just stoner guy in the film who plays guitar or something, and we get to see so much of that, and it's like, why do you keep going back to this? I don't care about this at all. Why aren't you focusing on Jason or this girl dealing with her psychic issues and trying to stabilize her mind? Also, the kills in Friday the 13th Part 7 might be the worst in the series, and from what I understand, they were pretty heavily axed by the MPAA, which sucks. That's really unfortunate because it seems like a lot of effort was put into these kills, and they were pretty gruesome at one point, but the fact of the matter is, that's not the way the film turned out, and the way the film turned out was with these really lame, undercooked kills that are some of the most forgettable in the entire series. So I like the psychic stuff in this film, and it is ridiculous, and I don't know if it was necessary for the Friday the 13th series at this point. It is an odd thing to put into these films, but it at least makes the movie entertaining on some level. And the final fight between Jason and the final girl using her psychic powers against him is pretty exciting. I like the end of this film, but so much of the stuff in the middle of it is just so painful to sit through. Crash landing in my number 9 spot is, well, to hear that info, it's gonna cost you. That's right, it is Jason Goes to Hell, the final Friday, the body-swapping Friday the 13th film. A lot of people don't like this film, and I think the reason they dislike it is because it features the least amount of Jason post the original film. Really, the only time we see Jason's figure in this film is the first 5 minutes and maybe the last 10 minutes of this film, and that's because he is using other people's bodies throughout the movie to do his dirty work, to carry out the kills. And personally, I do have to say that I like the idea of a slasher using other people to conceal his identity and carry out his dirty work. Does it work for a Friday the 13th film and for Jason Voorhees to be doing that? Not really, but that doesn't mean the movie isn't entertaining to some degree. What this film does is it introduces a lot of just strange lore and backstory to Jason Voorhees as a character that was never even mentioned, developed, or established in the previous films. It just is not really a Friday the 13th film. And that doesn't bug me as much because I'm not a really big fan, but for people who love Jason, this is really a movie that I could see being very annoying to them. Personally, I was entertained by the whole journey of Jason just going down south and looking for Crystal Lake and changing bodies and dropping other bodies off. There's a really cool scene where he abandons the body of a police officer that he had taken over, and we get to see what happens to this officer after Jason leaves him, and we get this really great grotesque makeup effect where the guy is melting to the ground, and it's disgusting, and it's actually really well done. It was really a change of pace and something new that I hadn't really seen in a Friday the 13th film up until this point. But something that is just so awful about this film, and it's just baffling to me, is that the music is so outdated and so not Friday the 13th. The music is still done by Harry Manfredini, who did the music for the first 10 films, this one being the 9th one, and I don't know why this one sounds so strange. It doesn't sound like Friday the 13th at all. It sounds like Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Why did they think this was a good idea for the music? It really cheapens the mood of this film drastically. It just does not fit. It was so bizarre and just out of place. I was like, why is this the music? The music in the other Friday films had been used pretty appropriately up until this point, but in this one I was like, why are we in a Nintendo 64 right now? What is going on? The bounty hunter character in this movie, for God knows why, is the only person that knows how to actually defeat Jason, and that's by putting Jason into the body of a relative of his and then killing him as that relative. But that's also the same way that Jason is able to resurrect himself, and it just creates way too much convoluted shit. It's a messy movie, but it's not boring, I can say that. I am entertained by it, and I enjoy the idea of Jason swapping bodies. It's just dumb, schlocky garbage. It's a very misguided and broken movie, but it's more entertaining than the films that I have previously mentioned. Coming in at number 8 is Friday the 13th Part 2. This is my favorite of the original 3 films, mostly because the characters in this one are the most tolerable, and it's the shortest of the first 3, so that's always a plus. The plot of this one is basically the same as the original film, except this time around Jason is the killer, and he's rocking this the town that dreaded sundown look with a bag over his head. I really like the idea of Jason being this deranged, disgusting psycho, just living in some shack in the woods with a bag over his head and his mother's decapitated head sitting on a shrine. It's the most logical place to take these films after the end of the first one. I mean, let's be real here. This film also has one of the most drawn out, awful scenes in the series, but it's also just really hilarious. It's when the cop gets out of his cop car and he's chasing Jason through the woods, and I swear to God, it's like 2 minutes of footage of him just jumping over puddles, running into puddles, jumping over rocks. It is the most monotonous, repetitive chase scene ever, and he's running so slow, and it's so unbelievable, but it's just hilarious. It's so funny. And this film does have kind of a creative ending where our final girl uses Mrs. Voorhees' sweater to trick Jason. It's the first time in the series that establishes this idea of Jason listening to no one except his mother. And I think that's a really good trait of his character, and this film demonstrates that pretty well, and it was a very nice way of fighting back against Jason. Plus, the jump scare in this film is actually pretty awesome. I love it when unmasked Jason breaks through the window and grabs our final girl screaming. Of course, it turns out to all be a dream or something. She just ends up in an ambulance, and that's the end of the film. But I actually prefer that jump scare over the original one, so shoot me. But that's what I think. Coming in at number 7 is Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Honestly, if they're willing to change up the location a little bit and just give me some fresh kills, I'll probably enjoy the movies more. This film is very middle of the road for me. I guess that's why it's number 7 on my list, right smack dab in the middle basically. You know, the characters are all fine, no one really stands out. The movie does go for comedy sometimes, and a lot of times I think the humor actually works. Plus, the kills in this film are actually some of the best in the series, if you'd ask me. One kid gets a hot sauna rock punched through his stomach. Another kid goes up and fights Jason on a rooftop and then gets his head punched off in one swipe by Jason, and his head rolls into a garbage can, and a teacher is picked up and shoved into a dirty barrel in some New York harbor and is drowned in it. And it's just got some of the most shocking, best kills in the series. And it's strange because it is one of the longest films in the series, but I was always engaged and entertained by the film throughout most of it, even though we are on a boat for the first hour of the film. I didn't mind that location, really. It is kind of a marketing lie, but I still think it made for a pretty good film. And Jason is also killed or defeated by raw sewage in this movie. I didn't see that coming. I thought that was kind of an odd way for him to go, but I guess if that's what makes sense. Coming in at number 6 is Friday the 13th, 2009, the remake. As far as remakes go, I feel like they actually did a lot of things right with this film. First off, though, the opening credits are shit. They're really, really bad. It's this black and white, choppily edited recreation of Mrs. Voorhees being killed. The font they use for the opening credits sucks, and the music is so generic and bland. The music in this film in general just does not hold a candle to the music originally composed for the series. But then we are very quickly introduced to our cast of characters, and they almost immediately start discovering strange things about the woods that they are staying in.
And then we see one get killed by Jason, another get killed by Jason, another get killed by Jason.
And then presumably the last one killed by Jason, and then the title for the film comes up 25 minutes into it. That was a ballsy move. And then we're introduced to our real main character, who is the brother of one of the girls that we see presumably killed in the beginning of the film. So we already get a pretty good setup for our main character, which most of the other films had never done. We're also introduced to this other group of just dumb teenagers who are going to some guy's cabin for the weekend, and the guy whose family owns this cabin is the biggest dickhead, and he's hilarious. Starts fights with everybody for no reason. It's so funny. His character's hilarious, and he gets a really great death that's so satisfying. Now, the look of this film definitely could have used some work. The night scenes are way too dark. Whenever people are running, there is a ton of shaky cam and you can never tell what's happening, and whenever it's late afternoon or evening time, it just has this horrible gold glow to everything with the sun reflecting off the water. It is a technically ugly ass film. Not gonna lie, it is not a very pretty film to look at. It's so overproduced. It is produced by Michael Bay, so it just has this look to it that's just really not satisfying to the eye. But all in all, this remake had some really great kills and gore to offer up, more captivating characters than normal for the series, and it also featured a Jason that was rebooted and changed in a different but pretty effective way. He moves a lot faster and much more violently in this film. Instead of just standing there and slowly approaching his prey, he lunges at them, grabs them by the neck, and just cuts their throat or rips their head off or whatever it is he has to do. He's way more frightening and scary and smart in this film. Plus, he has an underground cave system like Rambo. Flying into my number 5 spot is none other than Jason X. Yes, Jason in Space is my number 5 favorite Friday the 13th film. You can hang me, you can do whatever, but there is no denying that Jason X is some of the greatest fun this series has had to offer. I mean, you just can't deny that. This movie is dumb. It is really big and really dumb, and it kind of knows that. It's mostly self-aware, and the film is hilarious. This was the first Jason movie I had ever seen. A very weird place to start, admittedly, but I've always enjoyed this film. I always thought it was funny, and it is funny. It very much is a product of its time. It came out in 2001. It's clearly an Alien ripoff, and it also feels like it could be a Sci-Fi Channel special, although it does have some really great gore and kills in this movie. One guy gets screwed.
Besides, we found Condor.
What's his condition?
He's screwed.
Another girl gets her head frozen and smashed onto a table, and we can see her icy flesh and blood and brain matter scatter across the table. We also get to see Jason's head get shot off. This film just has a ton of awesome gore. Plus, David Cronenberg makes a cameo and gets a spear thrown through his back. It's awesome. You know, if you put Jason and the Friday the 13th franchise up on this pedestal and never want it to deviate from the original formula, and you hate it whenever they change anything about the core of Friday the 13th, I understand why you wouldn't like this film. But if you're like me and just want to see a dumb movie about some masked psycho slashing a bunch of morons on a spaceship, then Jason X will most definitely wet your whistle like it did mine. Landing at my number 4 spot is Friday the 13th Part 5, A New Beginning. This is oftentimes considered the Scooby-Doo Friday the 13th film because it turns out at the end of the film that Jason was not the killer, but it was a copycat, essentially. Now, this is not a fan favorite by any means in the Friday the 13th series, but I put it at my number 4. Why did I do that? Let me explain to you. The opening of this film is really well done. Corey Feldman returns as Tommy, witnesses Jason come out of his grave. He then wakes up screaming, and he is now an adult on his way to a halfway house because he has been so traumatized by killing Jason in the previous film. A lot of the characters in Friday the 13th Part 5 are actually very memorable. I will never forget when Joey gets axed by that guy chopping the wood. Joey's this kid that lives at the halfway house who's eating chocolate. He's getting chocolate fingers all over white bed sheets. Everyone's all upset with him. He won't shut his mouth, and he won't stop telling everyone about his life story. And this angry guy who's chopping wood just decides to go ahead and chop Joey. And that's essentially how this movie starts its motion into action. It is the first time in the series where someone other than Jason does the killing right off the bat. And I thought that was a very surprising and hilarious way to start the movie. I'll never forget that. Tommy is back, which is great to be following a character throughout the whole film that we had seen in a previous film. Another first for the series. Of course, it has Reggie the Reckless as well and his brother Demon, who are both standouts in this film on top of everything else I've already mentioned. And the kills in this movie are awesome. One guy gets a flare shoved in his mouth and looks like a jack-o'-lantern. This redneck character is driving his motorcycle dirt bike around his house in circles, gets decapitated by Jason's machete, and another guy gets tied to a tree with a belt as it presses into his eyeballs. It has some of the most brutal kills in the entire series, and in some ways, even though it isn't actually Jason doing the killing in this film, that little technicality, he can be more brutal than Jason, this Roy Burns guy that it actually ends up being. So I said it, you know? In some ways, Roy Burns is more brutal than Jason. But yeah, I feel like this movie gets a lot of flack. I feel like people get really butthurt about it because it's not Jason, but the first film wasn't Jason, and this film just has a lot to offer with characters and good kills. I don't know why it's so shit on by the fans of Friday the 13th. I thought it was actually one of the better ones in the series. And we are down to the top 3 Friday the 13th films. Which one could be number 3? Well, it's Freddy versus Jason. I've always really enjoyed this film. I've always been a big fan of the Nightmare on Elm Street films, so the inclusion of Freddy in this film has always been a great standout point for me. But something that Freddy vs. Jason does really well is it sets up the backstory of both Freddy and Jason in their most purest forms, I think. Even if you aren't familiar with Freddy Krueger or Jason Voorhees as characters, this film does a very nice job of quickly summarizing the key things that you have to know about these characters. And as far as being in the context of the Friday the 13th film series, remember that Jason X came right before this movie, which was a major departure in the entire Friday the 13th series. So what they do in this film is they really hit a hard reset on Jason Voorhees as a character and strip him down and bring him back to the most purest form of the character of Jason Voorhees. I think they do a really nice job of giving us the Jason that people expect and want. And this film also does introduce this idea that Jason is afraid of water, and I don't know what people think of that, but I personally think that's a great idea. He drowned as a boy. It only makes sense that as a character, his weakness is water. Freddy has a weakness, Jason has a weakness. I feel like there was actually some good thought put into this film about how they could get these characters in the same movie and make it semi-believable, because it's a ridiculous concept, of course. It's Freddy Krueger versus Jason Voorhees, but I feel like they did a really nice job of setting it up. I also really like the directing and the cinematography in this film. It all looks pretty sleek, and in a lot of ways it's very Scream-esque, especially in the beginning when we're introduced to our teenage characters. A lot of the dialogue and the way that it's shot just reminds me so much of the self-awareness of the Scream films, and I found it to be really funny. I think this is a very self-aware film that knows that it's just a dumb horror matchup movie, and it does it to the best of its ability, I think. And the whole idea for the plot of this film, with Freddy Krueger essentially using Jason as a puppet to create hype for himself on Elm Street and get people to talk about Freddy Krueger again, I think was very creative, and it was executed pretty well. I may sound like a crazy person praising Freddy vs. Jason so much, but I just feel like this film got everything right about the two main characters. It was the perfect matchup, I feel. And the final fight between them was brutal. It was a raw fight. There were limbs getting torn off, eyes getting gouged out, tons of blood, really wide fighting shots. It has a great final fight in the last 15 to 20 minutes of the movie. Honestly, Freddy vs. Jason, I think, was exactly what it had to be. I just don't know what else people would expect from a movie called Freddy vs. Jason. I feel like we got exactly what we would have expected with this film, and I feel like it was done very competently. I've always liked Freddy vs. Jason, and even watching it after watching 10 other Friday the 13th movies, I still stand by and say this is one of the best in the series. If you consider it in the core Friday the 13th series, this film does Jason really well. It does. So, I don't know. I have high praise for Freddy vs. Jason. I love that movie. Coming in at number 2 could be one of two films, and the one that it is Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives. The start of this film is incredible. It begins with this great sense of urgency as Tommy returns, this time played by Tom Matthews of Return of the Living Dead. Much better casting than in the previous film. Tom Matthews is much more charismatic and energetic in this role. Anyway, back to how this film starts. There's lightning, thunder, it's pouring. They're in a graveyard, Tommy and his friend. And Tommy's like, I gotta put an end to Jason for good. I know he's not really dead down there under the ground. I gotta finish this once and for all. But he botches it, and Jason gets struck by lightning, and he resurrects from the grave, and he's covered in maggots and blood and mud and rain, and he looks disgusting. He kills Tommy's friend, and Tommy runs away to the police station and is like, oh my god, Jason Voorhees is back. And the police chief is like, no, you're fucking crazy. Get in your cell. And he locks him up, and that's how the movie starts. And this movie just does not stop. The reason why this is such a great Friday the 13th film is because of the pace. It is always moving, always rolling. There isn't a dull moment in this film. Up until this point, especially in the first 3 films, there were so many slow, pointless, dark scenes where it was just boring to watch. But this film, there's always something happening. There's always this head-to-head battle between Tommy and this police officer, and the police officer's daughter, who thinks Tommy is kind of cute. And it's just this great dynamic that always makes for fun dialogue and interesting controversies between these characters. Part 6 also just has a great array of solid kills too. You got the paintball guy getting thrown into a tree with the smiley face, to the girl getting her head pushed into the side of the metal RV, making that protruding chunk of metal from the side, to the guy getting stabbed in the neck or the ear and the RV crashing, and Jason standing up on top of it. There's just a ton of memorable moments in this film, and it's all paced so quickly and never stops moving. This was also the first time in the series where they were really going for the intentional comedy and self-awareness, and it really worked in this situation. And the way they defeat Jason actually makes sense. They basically tie a chain around his neck with a rock on the end of it, throw it off the boat, and he gets dragged underwater and drowns, essentially, which makes sense and kind of goes into that Freddy vs. Jason idea of Jason's fear and weakness to water. It isn't as blatant and it isn't said in this film, but it's kind of similar. So yeah, Friday the 13th Part 6, Jason Lives, is definitely one of the best in the series for just being the most consistent and fun out of all of them. And my number one favorite Friday the 13th film is Unmasked Part 25. Just kidding, it is Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter. This is the best film in the series. It really is. After accomplishing the chore of watching the first 3 Friday the 13th films, it was kind of painful, if I'm being honest with you. This film was such a breath of fresh air. Right off the bat, we're treated to a really well-edited and exciting recap of the first 3 films. Instead of just taking the last 10 minutes of the previous film like they had done in the past, they actually took the time to just give us a quick synopsis of what had happened, which was great. It was a great way to start the film. Then it picks up exactly where the last one left off, at the farmhouse. Jason is then taken to the morgue, where his body is going to be laid to rest, or whatever they do with bodies at the morgue. But, of course, he isn't actually dead. He wakes up, slits the mortician's throat with a body saw, and then snaps his neck around backwards. It's a great first kill to the film. It was so visceral and violent looking. And from there we are introduced to our teenage characters of the film, which is the most memorable and best group of teenagers in the entire film series, in my opinion. One of them is played by Crispin Glover, who gives a great awkward performance in this film. I like this group of teenagers the most because they feel the most realistic. They're very hormonal, they get jealous of things very easily, and they're all very insecure in different ways. And that's the first time in these films where we've had teenagers get upset with one another in actual ways. You could actually feel the sexual tension in this film. It was actually really well done, and I enjoyed the banter between Crispin Glover and that guy he kept getting relationship advice from. He kind of looked like the kid in Donnie Darko, one of Donnie's friends. It just felt very realistic, and Crispin Glover's presence and performance just really, it was really nice to see that. But they actually aren't even the main characters of the film. There is another family that lives just across the road of the cabin that the teenagers are staying in. It's a mother and her 2 children, one of which is played by Corey Feldman, who is a really great character. Tommy is a very resourceful character who also makes these really nice monster movie masks. And then we're introduced to another character who is actually looking for Jason, we find out. He's posing as a camper, but he actually wants to find and kill Jason because his sister had been killed by him in the second film, or something like that. I don't know if it really makes sense, but he's still another type of character that we get screen time with that changes up the pace and variety of the series. Now let's get into the kills, because that's why we all watch these movies. The kills in Friday the 13th, the final chapter, are all pretty fantastic. One guy is in the water and gets a spear gun shoved up his crotch as he's lifted into the air and he's screaming.
It's brutal.
Another guy is taking a shower and Jason breaks through the glass of the shower and presses his head into the tile and pops his eyeball out or whatever. It's disgusting. Another girl is standing by a window. Jason breaks through it, grabs her, and in a wide shot throws her out the window on top of a car. I was so impressed when I saw that shot. I was like, wow, we have not seen stunt coordination like that in the Friday the 13th series so far. And then we see a dog jump through that window. Our final girl jumps through that window. There are a ton of people jumping out of windows in really wide shots in this film. It was really impressive and unexpected how well crafted the kills were, and the gore too. It was a bloody film. And then the end of the film, we have Tommy and his sister fighting off against Jason. And Tommy, Corey Feldman, runs upstairs and starts shaving his head. And it looked really gross because there were clumps of hair and little bloody scratches. It was actually a fake bald cap, but it almost looked real. It was really gross. And he comes downstairs after shaving his head, pretending to be Jason, which causes Jason to be a little alarmed and he's confused. And Corey Feldman actually kills Jason in this film. And we get this disgusting shot of Jason with the machete in his head here. And he falls down it and it slides into his head. And that's essentially the end of the film. Tommy hacking away at Jason, just yelling, "Die, die, die." Friday the 13th Part 4, the final chapter, is the quintessential Friday the 13th film because I feel like it perfectly hit all of the marks that the first 3 films were trying to hit. It succeeds in everything that Friday the 13th is meant to be. You get a lot of Jason. You get good teenagers and sex. You get a lot of good kills. You get captivating characters that are enjoyable to watch. It's the best of the Friday the 13th series, and I was so impressed by how much I enjoyed it and how much of a cut above it was from the first 3 films in the series. So that is my favorite film in the Friday the 13th film franchise. And that is how I would rank the Friday the 13th film series. Please tell me down below how you would rank these films, if you've even seen these films, if you've seen some of them, which ones have you seen and do you enjoy them? I don't usually talk to people about the Friday the 13th films because I hadn't seen most of them up until this point. So now I'm really clamoring to know what people like about these films, which ones they prefer, why they might not like this one, so on and so forth. So please let me know down below what you think of these films in general. And also, please let me know if you enjoyed this ranking format for a video. I've always wanted to do more ranked videos. I really haven't done many, if any, on the channel before, but I would like to do more. So if you did enjoy this format for a video, please let me know, and I'd love to do more ranking videos. And watch out for more Halloween-themed videos coming in the month of October. There will be a couple of more. I am planning a Criterion marathon for some time in the month of October, so watch out for that. And that's all I have for you. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. It would really help me out. And subscribe to the channel if you're interested in seeing more of my content. And I will talk to you all later.